So then how do you think having all this access to all this information sometimes leaves people feeling more lost instead of empowered?
From what I've seen, and even what I've seen in my own life, it's very easy to get on and watch other people doing things you dream about, and get stuck there. Because you get to see all the cool things, the end product, the dreamy things, but it's one thing to watch that and then say, okay, I'm going to take a break from this and now go confront all of the things I need to, the insecurities, the doubts, the fears, and face that pain that I have to pay the price for, and now starting my own journey to do so. There is a transition period, because it's one thing to talk about it and a completely different thing to be about it. So you can completely watch one thing and then be challenged to go start your own journey, or you can, of course, just like we do, keep watching those people that, like you said earlier, show us that it's possible for us to achieve these things while you're doing your own journey. But I've been stuck in that fear spot before, where I felt like God had given me certain abilities and talents and passions, and was stuck in that paralyzed place of not jumping out to use them because of, simple questions like, what are other people going to think? What if I'm not successful? What if what I do doesn't look like what they are? Is that the only way it's going to be successful? Is that the only way it's going to be impactful? I mean, even starting this podcast, we both have had thoughts for years. I've had, I think, more than you had, just being older, of being able to take what we do on a weekly basis, meeting together, challenging one another, walking through the process of mentorship and discipleship, and taking that to an online platform to be able to join other people into our community and along for our journey. But this was yet another jump. We were already doing this. Mm-hmm. We're just throwing a camera out here for you guys to join in on our conversations, but we were already doing this, but it was yet another jump to say, hey, I see all this information out there, and taking it from what we're doing to adding that extra element was a challenge for us.
Yeah.
Confronting that fear of, well, what if what we have been doing isn't received by other people?
Right.
And we had to get to the point to where, even if it's not, fine, it is impactful for us. We are facing things that challenge us, that keep us awake at night, that make us scared. We are trying to unbecome things that have limited us from finding our purpose in life.
Yeah. You see what all's possible, which is great. But then, I mean, we now have access to look at any industry, any niche job, any whatever, and say, how do I run a flower shop for funeral businesses? And it's like, there's somebody out there that's done that. So now you can, so like for me, where I feel like I at least got stuck was having all of these options, and it's, where do I start now?
Mm-hmm. It's overwhelming.
It's so overwhelming. When we talked about doing the podcast, it was even that. It was like, okay, well, what podcast are we, like not basing it off of, but like what podcast do we get inspired by? What do they do that we don't? And like, I feel like we got stuck in that for a little bit, because it was like, okay, well, I like the way this podcast does this, and I like the way this podcast does that. I like this intro. I like that. You know what I mean? There's so much that it is easy to get overwhelmed by it.
100%. It can be information overload. And that's where we both got to the point where we almost looked at each other and said, we just have to just start.
Right.
We have to dive in. Because you talked about, being able to find out how to run a flower shop. Okay, there's a ton of information. But when you get to the point where you've walked through all of those pieces, and let's say you actually get into action and try to utilize those tools. Okay, there's even how to, secure funding. But there is no explanation, and there's no way of putting this off on somebody else, putting it on AI, when you're actually at the bank about to pull the trigger for a commercial loan, and you're going to be on the hook for that amount of money, and it depends on your success of whether you'll be able to pay that back or not. Handling that feeling, facing that risk, that comes down to you and the work you're putting in. That's one of the biggest pieces, right? How do you face that fear? Do you believe enough? Have you put in enough work? Are you convicted enough about your purpose in life that you'll say, yeah, I'll be on the hook for $500,000 to fund my dream with somebody else's money, and I believe I'll do whatever it takes to pay that back. That's a whole different feeling.
And I think that it's important too. So like if that's the question, so it's like, okay, well now because there's also information for that too. You just got to start. Like you just got to start. You will find that information. Like whenever I talk about like going into, I call it like monk mode, but like whenever I, wasn't going out with friends, whenever I didn't have a lot of friends actually for a lot of my adulthood, I was surrounding myself with podcasts, and I liked podcasts because they were having those deep conversations I liked, long format. But in a way, like, this might sound like weird, but in a way, there for a moment of time, when I looked at my circle, I actually looked at these podcasts like they were my circle.
Yeah.
So it was like, I couldn't relate to the feeling quite yet of the struggle of that feeling that every business owner has where they have the sleepless nights of like, what the heck am I doing?
Yeah.
But if I didn't have the 3 or 4 podcasts that I had on rotation where they all talked about, no, we all face this, I don't know if I would have kept going through, just because I felt like I had these people that I was listening to every week also talking about like, no, this is normal. This feeling is normal. You just got to push through it. Could I relate to the feeling? Not in that moment. But whenever I finally did get to those moments, I would remember what Jocko said. I would remember what Cameron Haynes said. I would remember what even comedy podcasts, man, like relearning how to just laugh was so big for me.
Well, and the risk they face of trying to pursue that career, and when they're not popular yet, how hard it is to make money doing that. Yeah, it's big.
Some of the best motivational stories I've heard have been from comedians, how they've had $3 in their bank account and then they
lived in a car. They
lived in a car and they bombed a show, but now you look at them and they have Netflix specials, you know what I mean? So like that's so it was always reassuring for me, just hearing those little nuggets of wisdom, the little nuggets of human nature that they all went through in pursuit of their dreams. Does that make sense?
100%. And that's where it comes into the discipline about what information you're pursuing. 100%. You first saw that it's possible to do the things that line up with who you believe God created you to be and the talents that you want to share with the world. Then you pursued a deeper challenge of people that were now sharing, kind of like what we're sharing with our group, how to navigate and have practical application, how to handle those scary moments yourself. Like you can see all the cool, fancy Netflix specials of where they ended up. But now, if I'm really wanting to attack that and take a bet on myself, pursue the purpose of my life, how can I handle the emotions? How can I be disciplined in my thought life to where I'm pursuing the right things that even if I take a chance and it fails, I can remember that, hey, at the end of the day, God is my sole provision.
Yeah.
Money is a tool to help provide these things, but ultimately it's all provided through Him. And when we have that foundation built properly, when things are good and when things are bad, it doesn't ultimately matter with a kingdom mindset because He has us taken care of, whether we have a little or we have a lot.
Knowing what information you're taking in is so important too. Mm-hmm. Because that's the coincidence of opposites. Like with as much good as there is that I'm talking about, there is also that much bad. Mm-hmm. And I think on this pursuit, especially whenever I was in that phase of just absorbing everything, I definitely came across conspiracy theories. Those are fun. But
right, we all have dove in a few of those.
But digging, for me at least, digging so far deep into like conspiracy theories, or even just like, I don't know if sacrilegious is the right word, different perspectives and different ideas on our origins, like how humans came to be. I followed this guy for a while, and it wasn't that I ever necessarily believed him. It was just like, oh, like you're saying, like you've done all this research and it seems true. Like I'm talking about like Dead Sea Scroll stuff, Emerald tablets, like all these crazy things. And I was just listening to this guy, and he's like, no, like I've seen him, I've worked with people, I've translated them, this is what they said. And it's like, okay, well, that's interesting. In hindsight, when I look back on that time frame, whenever I was like looking into that stuff, I actually I know deep down that wasn't truth, just because of the darkness. Like I felt the deeper I got into this thing.
Yeah.
And what I really think in hindsight now, looking back at that was me straying further from the truth, because there was that guy actually did a debate with a Christian historian, theologian.
Yeah, Wes Huff.
Yeah. Dude. And
yeah,
that debate with Wes Huff and Billy Carson, again, it was a beautiful moment in internet history for me, because it was like, oh, that feeling was validated because Wes Huff just came and rocked this guy's world with facts and knowledge and
if you get a chance, check that out.
Oh yeah, it's the most graceful way of saying, hey, you actually have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah,
hour and a half video worth the watch. No, it's definitely important to see where you, and again, like opportunities. I got stuck in the opportunity of like, okay, what if there's more to God than what just the Bible is saying? What if there's more? And it did lead to a lot of weird conspiracy theories type things. But I also feel like looking at that now, because growing up, like if I was looking into that stuff, that would have been heretical, which maybe it is. But challenging my faith through all that strengthened my relationship with the Lord so much more, because I really feel like giving myself the freedom to explore that and discover for myself that was not the truth.
Yeah.
Only made me look back to God and say, okay, yeah, for sure. Like I now know that I can challenge my faith, and it just made me feel a lot more connected, and in the long run.
Yeah, because now it's personal to you and not something somebody gave you and told you, hey, you're supposed to do this and that with information. Don't question it. Don't ask any questions. This is what you're supposed to do.
Right.
God wants it to be personal, and he wants it to be challenging, I believe. You know, Paul talks about the mystery of the gospel, and Jesus would share parables, and he would say, those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, will have the deeper understanding. And one of the most beautiful moments for me in making sure I'm challenging my own truths to make sure they line up with God's is the disciples came and asked Jesus, like, wait, what do you mean by this weird parable? And that if we have eyes to see, we'll see, and ears to hear, we'll hear. And he said, basically, to sum it up, it's for this moment right here. If you really care, even after I give you something that seems vague or maybe it's hard to understand, you'll still seek me out and come find the true meaning of what I'm trying to tell you. But those that don't care, that are just here for me to feed them and for me to do a flashy show for them, they'll leave, and I'll be left with those that are actually interested in pursuing me.
Yeah.
If he wanted everybody to understand the deepest of stuff, he would just literally put it out on a scroll or parchment or in a book and say, hey, this is it. This is all the deepest, most intricate details and truths of the world. And those that read it, great, whatever it is. We still have to put in effort to pursue that. But he goes a step further, it seems, to almost cloak it in these parables that seem confusing, but he wants us to show that deep level of commitment of saying, hey, I don't get this just yet, but I'm going to keep walking with you and serving you and doing my best to look more like you and less like me until I understand this truth in my life.
Right.
It's pretty crazy.
Even with the Bible, having the opportunity to have different perspectives or different sermons, even just the fact that I can pull up a sermon from any church in the United States and just hear a different message about the same story.
I mean, just thousands of them. Yeah.
Thousands. What really answered so many of my questions was actually Jordan Peterson's biblical series. Because for me, like, it was always like reading the Bible stories, growing up in the church, even working for the church and preaching these Bible stories. I always felt this disconnect of like, okay, but it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't.
Yeah.
I can go preach about how good God is, but I don't feel it. Like, there's some practical elements I'm missing, because it's like I could, for whatever reason, like I could sit here and pray and say, God, I accept you as my Lord and Savior. Jesus, I accept you as my Lord and Savior. But it didn't feel like, I don't know, like it just felt like there was some disconnect. But then having all of Jordan Peterson's knowledge of psychology and what the practical side of these Bible stories look like in everyday life really gave me this new foundation to look at the Bible.
He's got some really good insights, yeah.
Yeah, just having somebody with that knowledge that I could find on the internet, with the knowledge of how the humans' psyches work, tied into biblical principles and how you can use biblical principles to improve your psyche and to improve the way you function as a human being. Mm-hmm. Like, that was so... I didn't know the Bible was capable of that. Like, it talks about, like, the Bible is a living word, and I never really understood that actually until hearing other perspectives and hearing, there's a common trope in this story. Everybody is capable of having their own Abraham story, their own Moses story. Everybody is capable of that. And I think just having the resources available to access that at any time that I want, again, like that's just been a big blessing for me. And I think, feeling lost is normal for a while, because for me, I was pursuing truth. What is the truth? What is the truth about God? What is the truth about, is there really a deep state? Is there really is the government controlling everything? There's that was my ultimate quest in my 20s, was what is the truth? And that branched off into every aspect of my life, and just being able to have all the resources. Yes, it was overwhelming. Yes, I got lost in it. But ultimately what that did was all the things that were wrong or that weren't the truth, it just challenged my faith even more.
Yeah.
And through all this research and through all the hours and hours of podcasts I've listened to, through all this, I know for me, for certain, I can confidently say God is real. And 100%. That came from being in that lost place, discovering the truth, and applying these nuggets of wisdom into my life from influencers I have grown to trust.
Yeah, but you had to put in the work. You had to go on the adventure.
Correct.
You didn't just sit and take somebody's word for it.
Right.
And the reason you wanted certain truth in your 20s is because things about the government impacted your world here.
Right.
But the reason it got deeper and went in a different direction about your faith is because your priorities changed to a kingdom mindset, and you wanted the truth of how these things impacted you eternally.
100%.
And starting that journey and realizing, hey, these truths about the government, deep state, and all that stuff, whether we find that out or not, it still wasn't feeding that ultimate void in your life and saying, well, there's still more. And that's where you led you to the journey. It was beautiful. Led you to the journey of finding the truth about who God is and where we came from. What is our purpose individually, and being able to place yourself in those Bible stories.
Yes.
And that's the piece that we have to make sure. We talk about practical application here, is you have to know the word enough that when you hear 10 different sermons on a certain topic, you can say, hey, I've read that. I've wrestled with that. I've felt the Holy Spirit tell me this about the word. I felt like the discernment has shown me this about this piece. These sermons line up from what I've seen and what I feel like Jesus showed himself, and I feel like these haven't. But it's because your personal relationship with the Bible. That's the thing about it being risky. If we put in the work with the information, have access to these tools, okay, if we depend on others and follow their journey only, we can be at their disposal on what truths they give us. But if we find the truth for ourselves directly from the source, through the word of what God says, of what Jesus did on his time on earth, then we can begin to have discernment about all of the information out there, just like you shared through your own personal story. That discernment came as you journeyed through there. And that's when the tools like this become useful and not lead to that feeling of, hopelessness or being lost, but you've paid the price of finding out what the truth is.
Well, I think that's what's so important too. I'm going to say this as a arrogant person who's not a parent yet, but I feel like that's something that at least I feel like I missed out on. Was growing up, it was, no, this is the right way and that's the only way. This is the right way. But my curious mind, I have a heart for curiosity, so I was always asking, well, why? Why can't I do that? Why can't I hang out with that person? Why can't I do this? Why? So what that led me to do into my teenage years was do those things, because I wanted to just figure out why. And I think it's the same for knowledge. If you're only just living in, challenge me on this, if you're only living in, okay, this is all I know, and this is just what I stick to, and you're not ever stress testing those ideas or challenging those ideas, unless you're just 100% locked in with God, like, I don't know how much stronger your relationship can ever become if you're never, like Wes Huff even talks about, like how he grew up with a Quran and the Torah right next to the Bible on their coffee stand, and his parents were missionaries.
Yeah.
His parents literally encouraged him to look into other religions because they were so confident in their faith in Jesus.
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point, and I think that is true. And from a parenting perspective, it would have been beneficial for you to be able to see, given the reasons why you don't go the other way, because then you say, hey, I am going to stay here because I was told if I go over there, what would happen? And just like with business stuff, we can try different things, stress test ideas, but where it gets risky is when we begin stress testing things that lead to sin. And God does a good job as a loving father explaining why we should follow him and why we shouldn't. And I'll give you a funny story about, I'm trying to do that for my kids. I tell them, hey, when I give you an answer or I tell you to do something, if you don't understand, I want you to ask me why. And they've done a good job, especially when it comes down to emotional, spiritual, life, character decisions. I want them to understand why I'm telling them to do that, so they're not just like, man, my dad's making me do this. And I think that's where you're coming from, because as humans, we're curious, and it's like, well, if I'm told no, I can't have something, typically we're like, well, I want to have that thing, unless we know why. Well,
I'm just going to do it harder now.
Right? Yeah, I'm going all in. Well, my son's really good at asking why. So is my daughter. But my son asked why on everything. So he's a snacker. And the other day we were at my daughter's basketball game, and he asked if he could have a soda. And I said no. And he said, why? And I said, son, if it's about something, if I tell you no on something and it has something to do with creating a habit in you, a character issue, a faith issue, I will explain why. But when I tell you no for a soda, and I've already told you why we limit those because of the sugar content, and it's a snack, I don't have to explain why. And that's a really good example, but I'm still answering that why and setting that precedence of, okay, it's a soda. It's not like he may want one. He's always going to want a soda, and he's going to have to fight that when he gets older, just like we do. Do we diet? Do we not? Do we just get old and fluffy? And he can do that later on. But right now I'm responsible for that. But it really helped me open my eyes too, of saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to answer why and I'll walk you through that. But there's some things in life that we just don't need to mess with, of saying, why. It's a simple question. It's sugar. It's not healthy for you. And that's it. You've been taught that. And once you know that, now it's up to you to have the discipline to say, you know what? I've already been explained why. So there's no reason to keep beating a dead horse.
The higher your level of trust, the less need for details.
100%.
Yeah, that's big. That's really big.
But yeah, you're right. That's a scenario where we do need to challenge those things and go through. But God does give us the why. And if we start there, it could keep us from stress testing things that do conceive sin in our lives and lead to death.